I'm sure clicking on this link, you saw how short this podcast is. Let me assure you, I have put forth hundreds of thousands of words into podcasts for you guys. I have put content out there left, right, and center. I can assure you this is the most important podcast I have yet recorded. It doesn't need a lot of fluff. It doesn't need me to go on a bunch of rants. I am giving you something that is so incredibly powerful that I thought about not coming on here and talking about it at all. That only happened one other time, and that's when I talked about the PSA 9 is dead concept. Now, that post got 1,100,000 views to this point. I believe this is a more powerful concept. Now, the point I'm going to make has to do with sports cards, and it ties in the history that I've gone through in all of my podcasts, as well as the content that I built over on my Slabnomics Instagram, where I speak about what the grading environment has looked like and how the market has been different in 2020, 2021 versus 2025. Bolted onto that, I've been talking a lot about Pokemon because I've been learning a lot about markets through Pokemon. And why bring up Pokemon, you ask? Well, I found it to actually be the most stable market over the past 5 years, even compared to high-end sports cards. So in order to set the stage about what I'm going to talk about shortly, I need to tell you a little bit about the history of cards for a second. First true market supercycle took place during the junk wax era. Topps, Upper Deck, Fleer noticed they could start printing these cards to oblivion because all of a sudden there was a craze for sports cards. Before, these had just been things people put into their bike spokes or things that they traded with each other and had fun with. Now, Gen X was coming into money and they wanted to have these assets that they wanted so much as a kid. So prices started booming and the manufacturers responded in kind by printing to the absolute moon. Now, looking back at the mid 80s to early 90s, we can all say, wow, what a shame it was. There were some amazing athletes that fell into this time, and unfortunately, they were victims of this junk wax era. More about that in a second. The manufacturers noticed that things were going sideways, so of course they decided to use technology and innovate, and thus the refractors were born. The demand settled down a little bit, print runs came down, but this new evolution of the refractor and the cool inserts that they started making really gave new life to the hobby that had suffered from this lack of innovation that we saw throughout the mid 80s into the early 90s. And of course, important to note that 1999 is when Pokemon hit the US and it went absolutely bonkers. I remember being a 9-year-old kid, and let me tell you, Pokemon craze was everywhere. Wish I would have done more Pokemon than Beanie Babies, but here we are. The game-changing success of the 1993 Topps Finest Baseball Series with their chromium finish was built upon and catapulted to the moon by the 1996 inception of Topps Chrome Baseball and Topps Chrome Basketball. In an age where everyone thinks of Prism as the GOAT, Topps Chrome is the true GOAT, and I believe with Fanatics taking over the license, that is going to be re-established. You better bet Michael Rubin believes that too. With the wild success of 1996 Topps Chrome, it was followed up in 2002, the new millennium, by the expansion of the gold parallel. This was in Series 1 of Topps Chrome Baseball. Series 2 added the black refractor, and from then on, they added refractors here, there, and everywhere as they expanded the demand. Now, Panini, which had always operated more in the sticker game and the low end, finally got the license away from Topps, and they came up huge with their Prism brand debuting in 2012 for football, baseball, and basketball. Following the blueprint that Topps had before them, they started small in their print run and small in their parallel list. However, ever since 2012, there has been the expansion of new sub-brands under Panini, new sub-brands under Topps Chrome, as well as other brands that have come either under the fold of those by acquisition, or those that have tried to play in the same sandbox without any licensing like Leaf. Now I can hear you start snoring over there, so I promise the history lesson is over, but we've come now to the junk parallel era. Topps in the 80s and 90s realized that they could print to the moon, and then they had to innovate in order to freshen things up and get demand back where it needed to be. The same thing happened when we got into the Prism and the Topps Chrome parallels of the 2000s into the 2010s and into modernity. Now we have so many parallels that it's mind-boggling to try and figure out what they are, and almost absurd to try and consider collecting them all. Shout out Pokemon on that one. Back to the present day and what I've been doing with Slabnomics. What happened before this grading explosion that we had during COVID? What happened after we had this market demand? We had such an incredible demand in grading in 2020 and 2021 that PSA actually had to shut their doors. And then, as I highlighted in my PSA 9 is dead carousel that got the 1.1 million views, the population exploded from 5 million PSA 10s that have been graded all the way from 1991 through 2019 to tacking on 30 1 million PSA 10s through 2020 through 2025. That's 6 times the supply that there had been added in 6 years versus the 28-year time period. Now, one quick thing, I want to make sure you're following me at Slabnomics. That's where I put out all this content where I can deep dive into this stuff because I know listening to it can be a little bit much. So make sure you're following me at Slabnomics. Also subscribe to my free newsletter, Comped, which you can do via my profile at Slabnomics. Okay, so the supply went crazy, right? And this new mountain of supply basically killed the PSA 9 because there was so much supply that why does anyone need to go get a PSA 9 when a PSA 10 is pretty easy to come by? So that being the case for most of the ultra modern parallels that we have, except for the really rare ones, I started going down another rabbit hole when I started looking at Pokemon and Beckett because collectors, the PSA parent company, actually bought Beckett really recently. Now, I don't know if you felt this way, but during the past couple years, I've been feeling like Beckett has been getting worse and worse. So when collectors went and bought them, it really made me raise my eyebrows. I wanted to go investigate why they would do that. What I found opened my eyes and changed how I looked at the entire market. Now, the last piece of content that I bring up that I need you to know about was the State of the Hobby that I did at the end of the year. In it, I looked at 2025 and how it was different from COVID times. What I found was all of the COVID demand bubbled up from the bottom. And it makes sense, right? All of us Joe Schmoes got a few extra bucks in our pocket. We had not much to do, and we were looking for ways to make a little bit more money when everything was falling around us. So a lot of those low-end cards went bananas, like base cards of Luka Doncic or Erling Haaland if you're into soccer. So 2025 was a great year for sports cards. It must have done the same, right? What I found was that low end and high end were now operating in 2025 as totally different markets. And in fact, they decoupled in their price movements in 2021, about mid 2021. So in 2025, when you're hearing the card markets going bananas and you look at your base cards being like, why aren't they moving? That's because it's all the Kevin O'Leary's buying these investable asset cards for alternative investments. So we're in the junk parallel era where we're flooded with too many parallels. Beckett was almost run into the ground and got rescued by PSA. Why did they want them? Tell you in a second. And one little clue for that, the reason that Beckett was actually getting saved, that PSA I'm sure saw, is because of Pokemon. Pokemon started going nuts in Beckett registries. So then third thing, we have this bifurcation of the market where high end is operating different from low end. You put all three of those factors together, junk parallel era causing fatigue, Beckett now coming into prevalence because of Pokemon for some reason, and the high end coming into its own as an alternate asset class with people looking for the long term. And that gives you what I'm about to say. Now, I'm not one to look you in the eye and tell you that I know what is about to happen. I have avoided doing that every single episode of Slabnomics, but what I'm going to tell you I firmly believe in. There is a misvaluation in Beckett 10 and Beckett 10 Black Label. This has come to my attention through Pokemon because I understood the mechanism that PSA 10s in Pokemon are actually pretty dead themselves for the long term. There's 44,000 PSA 10s in some of those Pokemon cards, very popular Pokemon cards that go for $2,000. This new era that we are about to walk into is the era of hyper rarity and scarcity. And that mechanism is going to be through the BGS 10 Pristine and BGS 10 Black Label. Now, if you go look at the prices for Black Label and Pristine cards, even of huge iconic cards, you're not going to see the kind of multiples that you would expect due to their rarity. And I'm going to tell you why that is and why that's about to change. Price multiple of a PSA 9 to a PSA 10 is generally accepted to be about 2.5, meaning if I have a card that's a PSA 9 and it's $100, then my PSA 10 is probably about 250. Now that's generally accepted. It's a rule of thumb because most of the time the population mirrors that roughly. Now I know what you're thinking. That's crazy to say with all of these different cards, but that's pretty much the baseline of going from 9 to 10 in most cards that have real demand. Now what you're going to find though is that older cards in vintage sets, say the 1980 Topps Ricky Henderson, say the 1989 Upper Deck Ken Griffey Jr., these are going to have much higher multiples going from 9 to 10, meaning 10s are much more rare because the gem rate's a lot harder. Case in point, the 1989 star rookie Ken Griffey Jr., the PSA 9 to 10 population is about 7.85 times. So there's almost 8 times as many PSA 9s as there are 10s. So it stands to reason with supply and demand and how iconic that card is, that the value multiplier from PSA 9 to PSA 10 is not just going to be 2.5, because it's so much rarer to have that 10 than the 9. Now remember I said almost 8 on that multiple for the population from 9 to 10? Well, the value multiplier is actually a little bit over 12, 12.37. And I found in searching through thousands of cards, I swear these tired eyes and these forehead wrinkles, the more iconic a card, the more that 10 matters. So that multiplier from 9 to 10 becomes more and more exacerbated. That's why you have an 8 to 12 multiple difference between population and actually valuation. Now I'm going to tell you one more thing, and then I'm about to end this podcast. I'm going to leave you with something truly tremendous. Remember what I just said about the PSA 9 to 10 multiple. In this very card, it's about 8 on the population and 12 on the valuation. Do you know what the PSA 10 to BGS 10 population multiple is? Do you know how many more PSA 10s there are than BGS 10 Pristines? There are almost 39 times more PSA 10s than BGS 10 Pristines. While there's 4,357 PSA 10s, there's only 113 BGS 10 Pristines. Now you would think such an iconic card, we just saw the multiple from 9 to 10 on the PSA side, how because of that rarity and the iconic class of this card, it was actually worth more to go from the 9 to the 10 because of how famous the card is. Shouldn't that be the case when going from a PSA 10 to a BGS 10? A Pristine where it's only half a grade off of a perfect card? But with the BGS 10 Pristine being 39 times more rare than a PSA 10, its valuation comparatively is only 1.79 times a PSA 10. 39 times more rare, less than twice as expensive. This is broken, and with 1,000 millionaires being made every single day because of AI, this will not be broken for long. Because the only reason that this is broken is because the population market that wants and can pay for those BGS 10 Pristines has been too small. Not enough people make up that liquidity pool who are going to pay for those 113 10s that people want a lot more money for than the PSA 10s. I mean, think of it. There's already over 4,300 people holding a PSA 10 of that Ken Griffey Jr. But when this is becoming more and more an alternate asset class that people are socking away as a long-term investment, and 1,000 millionaires are being minted per day, you can bet that this is not going to last for much longer. So before signing off, if you thought this was important and you want to talk about it with your friends, make sure to share this episode with people that will get this. Secondly, if you want more information like this, I'm about to go live with a resource hub that is going to give you things like this broken down by what cards to actually look for, as well as my own portfolio of what I've been buying. If you sign up for that tier of access, you're also going to be getting an extra podcast that I put out only for those tier subscribers. So more information coming on that soon. Be sure to follow me at Slabnomics. And as always, keep building, and I'll talk to you later.